After 70, this morning drink kills inflammation and pain. The first light of dawn crept through the sheer curtains, painting long, soft streaks across the hardwood floor. For Eleanor, now 74, mornings were no longer the hurried, caffeine-fueled dashes they'd been in her 40s. They were slow, deliberate, and often painful. She lay still for a moment, taking inventory. A familiar, unwelcome ritual. Her knuckles, gnarled like the roots of the old oak tree in her backyard, throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. Her right hip, the one she'd replaced a decade ago, felt stiff, as if the new joint had developed a resentment for its host. And there was the general all-over stiffness, a feeling she described to her daughter as being made of rust. This was the new normal. Or so she had been led to believe. For years, Eleanor had followed the script. The one written by glossy magazine ads and well-meaning but hurried doctors. The script said, "You are aging. Pain is a part of that. Here is a prescription for an anti-inflammatory. Here is another for the acid reflux the first one causes. Here is a cream for the stiffness. Come back in 3 months." She had filled her medicine cabinet, and in turn, her body, with these solutions. They worked, after a fashion. They muted the sharp edges, turning the screaming pain into a dull, background hum. But they never removed the rust. They never addressed the source. They simply made the machinery of her body quieter as it continued to grind itself down. The turning point had come 6 months ago, during a visit from her grandson, Leo. He was 12, all boundless energy and curious questions. He'd wanted to build a birdhouse. Eleanor, a former high school art teacher who had spent a lifetime working with her hands, had wanted nothing more than to help. But after 20 minutes of sawing and hammering, her hands had seized up. The pain had been so sharp, so absolute, that she dropped the hammer, scattering nails across the garage floor. She'd seen the look on Leo's face, not anger, but a kind of worried pity. That was the look she couldn't abide. The look that said, "Grandma is fragile." She was not fragile. She was a woman who had rebuilt a cottage, raised 2 children largely on her own, and had once hiked the Inca Trail. But her body was betraying that truth. That evening, unable to sleep, she had found herself down a rabbit hole on her laptop. Not the glossy health websites, but the obscure corners of medical journals, university studies, and forums for people who, like her, were searching for a different way. The word that kept appearing was not a drug, but a spice. Turmeric. But it was more than that. It was the delivery system. She learned that turmeric's golden compound, curcumin, was notoriously difficult for the body to absorb. On its own, it would pass through her system like a tourist on a bus, offering little benefit. It needed 2 key components to unlock its power: black pepper, which contains piperine, a natural bioavailability enhancer, and a healthy fat, which allowed the fat-soluble curcumin to be absorbed. The deeper she read, the more the picture clarified. Chronic inflammation, she learned, was not just the ache in her joints. It was the silent engine behind so many of the ailments that plagued her generation. It was the fire that smoldered beneath the surface, causing not only arthritis but contributing to heart disease, cognitive decline, and a host of other age-related issues. The drugs she was taking were like throwing blankets on a fire. What she needed was a way to extinguish the embers from the inside out. Her discovery wasn't a pill or a prescription. It was a ritual. A simple, natural, morning drink. The first morning she tried it, she approached it with the skepticism of a lifelong educator. She gathered the ingredients on her kitchen counter: a small jar of organic turmeric powder, a pepper grinder, a lemon, a piece of fresh ginger root, a bottle of cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil, and a small jar of raw honey from the farmer's market. She had seen recipes for golden milk before, but dairy, she had also learned, could be inflammatory for some. The olive oil, a cornerstone of the Mediterranean diet known for its anti-inflammatory properties, would serve as her healthy fat. It was a radical departure. Putting oil in her morning drink seemed counterintuitive, but the science was sound. She boiled water in her electric kettle. Into her favorite ceramic mug, she measured a teaspoon of the vibrant, ochre-colored turmeric powder. She grated a thumbnail-sized piece of fresh ginger directly into the cup, its sharp, spicy aroma filling the air. Then came the crucial elements, a generous pinch of freshly ground black pepper and a tablespoon of the fruity, green gold olive oil. A squeeze of half a lemon and a drizzle of honey for taste. Finally, she poured the hot water over the mixture and stirred. The result was a swirling, amber gold liquid, fragrant with earth and citrus. It looked like a sunrise in a cup. The first sip was an acquired taste, earthy, spicy, with the smooth richness of the olive oil and the bright kick of lemon and ginger. It wasn't the comforting familiarity of her morning coffee, but it was something else. It felt intentional. It felt like medicine, but not the sterile, chemical kind. It felt like a conversation with her body. She made a promise to herself that morning. She would do this every day for 30 days. No other changes. She would keep taking her prescribed medications for now, but she would add this ritual. She would see if the rust could be oiled. The first week, nothing changed. Her knuckles still ached. Her hips still protested when she rose from her favorite armchair. But she noticed a subtle shift in her energy. The mid-afternoon slump, the one that had her reaching for a second cup of coffee or a sugary snack, seemed less profound. She felt a little more present. By the end of the second week, a small miracle occurred. She was weeding her small rose garden, a task she usually had to do in 10-minute increments, punctuated by breaks to stretch her back. She had been out there for nearly 45 minutes when she realized she hadn't felt the need to stop. Her hands were dirty, her knees were stained with soil, but the familiar, gnawing ache in her lower back was quieter. Not gone, but turned down. The volume had been lowered from a 7 to a 3. She sat back on her heels, a clump of damp earth in her hand, and allowed herself to feel a cautious hope. The third week brought the real test. A cold front moved in. For as long as she could remember, a drop in barometric pressure was a harbinger of agony. It was a non-negotiable fact of her life. The day before the storm, her left knee would swell, her wrists would feel like they were caught in vices, and she would move through her day with a grim, quiet stoicism. The rain came on a Tuesday. Eleanor woke to the sound of it pattering against the window pane. She braced herself, waiting for the familiar wave of pain to announce itself. She waited. She flexed her hands. She rotated her ankles. She sat up and put her feet on the floor. There was stiffness, yes. But the sharp, pre-storm agony? It wasn't there. She felt a dull awareness in her joints, like an old memory of pain, but not the pain itself. She walked to the kitchen, her steps deliberate, waiting for it to hit her. It never did. She prepared her golden drink with a newfound reverence that morning. The ritual was no longer an experiment, it was a lifeline. As she stirred the mixture, watching the ingredients meld into a unified, golden whole, she felt a profound shift within herself. She was no longer a passive passenger in a body that was failing her. She was an active participant in its healing. By the end of the 30 days, the transformation was undeniable. It wasn't just the reduction in pain, though that was remarkable. It was the return of something she thought she had lost forever. Capacity. She began to do things she had written off. She took up her watercolor brushes again, her hands steady enough to hold them for an hour. She started going for longer walks, not just around the block but to the park and back, a 2-mile loop she hadn't managed in years. She even called her daughter, Sarah, with a request that made Sarah gasp. "I'd like you to bring the kids over on Saturday. I think I'd like to teach Leo how to make a proper birdhouse. The one we started." When Sarah arrived with her 2 children, she found Eleanor in the garage, her tools laid out neatly on the workbench. The scene was so ordinary, so reminiscent of the grandmother they remembered from a decade ago, that Sarah's eyes welled up with tears. She quickly blinked them away, not wanting to embarrass her mother. Eleanor saw them anyway. "No tears," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "Just pass me that plank of cedar, would you?" As she guided Leo's hand on the saw, she felt a surge of gratitude not just for the reduction in pain, but for the return to her life. She was not a woman who was managing her age. She was a woman who was living it. Her success with the morning drink sparked a chain reaction. She began to see her entire diet through a new lens. If a simple combination of turmeric, pepper, and olive oil could have this profound effect, what else was she consuming that was feeding the fire of inflammation? She started researching. She learned about the inflammatory properties of refined sugar, processed flours, and industrial seed oils. She began to make changes, not as a strict diet, but as a natural evolution of her new philosophy. Her breakfast, once a bowl of processed cereal or white toast with jam, became a bowl of oatmeal made with whole oats, topped with fresh berries, walnuts, and a drizzle of that same olive oil. Lunch was often a large salad of dark, leafy greens, kale and spinach, topped with chickpeas, roasted sweet potatoes, and a simple dressing of lemon, olive oil, salt, and pepper. Dinners became simpler: a piece of grilled salmon, a heap of steamed broccoli, a side of quinoa. She didn't feel deprived. For the first time in years, she felt nourished. The food she ate had color, texture, and flavor. It was a far cry from the bland, low-fat, low-flavor senior diet she had unconsciously adopted, which had been filled with processed convenience foods that were easy to prepare but offered little in the way of real nutrition. The morning drink remained the cornerstone. She began to experiment, tweaking the recipe to keep it interesting. Sometimes she would substitute the lemon with a splash of organic apple cider vinegar, with the mother, for its probiotic benefits. On colder mornings, she would add a pinch of cayenne pepper for an extra circulatory kick, a dash of cinnamon to help with blood sugar regulation, or a few cardamom pods for their digestive properties. Each addition was another tool in her kit, another way to speak the language of her body. The results continued to compound. 6 months after that first cup, Eleanor went for her annual checkup. Her doctor, a capable but traditionally-minded physician named Dr. Evans, looked over her chart with a furrowed brow. "Well, Eleanor, your blood work is impressive," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Your C-reactive protein levels, which are a key marker for systemic inflammation, have dropped significantly. They're in a range we'd expect to see in someone 20 years younger. Your cholesterol panel has improved, too, and your blood pressure is excellent. What have you been doing?" Eleanor smiled, a slow, quiet smile. "I started drinking something," she said. "A little something in the morning." Dr. Evans leaned back in his chair. "Oh? What's in it?" She told him. She told him about the turmeric, the black pepper, the olive oil. She told him about the ginger and the lemon. She expected skepticism, a lecture about the importance of sticking to prescribed medications, a warning about unproven natural remedies. Instead, he listened. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "You know," he said, "there's a growing body of research on the bioavailability of curcumin with piperine and healthy fats. I have other patients who've had good results with similar approaches. I'm not going to tell you to stop. In fact, I'm going to look at your medication list. We might be able to step you down on some of these anti-inflammatories. They have their own long-term risks, especially at your age." Eleanor felt a wave of validation wash over her. She wasn't some kooky old lady messing around with woo remedies. She had used the principles of nutritional science, ancient wisdom, and her own dedication to become an active agent in her own health. That afternoon, she walked out of the pharmacy not with a new prescription, but with a sense of empowerment. She had reduced her medication load, with her doctor's blessing, by nearly half. Word began to spread. It started with her bridge club. Her friend Margaret, who suffered from debilitating rheumatoid arthritis, noticed Eleanor's increased mobility. "You're practically bouncing around the card table," Margaret had said, a mixture of admiration and envy in her voice. "What's your secret?" Eleanor didn't preach. She didn't hand out a pamphlet. She simply invited Margaret over the next morning. They sat in her sun-drenched kitchen, and Eleanor silently prepared 2 mugs of her golden drink, sliding one across the counter to her friend. "Here," she said. "Just try it. Every morning. Give it a month." Margaret, desperate for any relief that didn't come with a list of side effects, did. Within 3 weeks, she called Eleanor, her voice thick with emotion. "I was able to close my fist this morning," she said. "For the first time in 2 years, I could close my fist." The ripple effect continued. A neighbor who suffered from chronic migraine started the ritual and reported a reduction in frequency and intensity. A former colleague who struggled with digestive issues found that the combination of ginger and turmeric soothed his gut in ways his antacids never could. Eleanor never claimed the drink was a cure-all. She was careful to share her story not as a prescription, but as a journey. She always advised people to talk to their own doctors, especially if they were on blood thinners or other medications that could interact with high doses of turmeric. But she became, in her own quiet way, a beacon of possibility in her community. She was proof that the narrative of inevitable, unmanageable decline in one's 70s was not the only story that could be written. Her mornings transformed from a time of dread to a time of sacred ritual. It was no longer about managing pain, it was about celebrating the day ahead. The simple act of making her drink, grating the ginger, grinding the pepper, squeezing the lemon, became a form of mindfulness. It was a declaration of self-care, a daily act of rebellion against the notion that aging meant surrendering. She learned to listen to her body in a new way. She discovered that the drink wasn't just a passive anti-inflammatory. It was a catalyst that helped her body's own systems function more efficiently. The antioxidants in the turmeric and ginger helped neutralize free radicals. The healthy fats in the olive oil supported cellular health. The black pepper unlocked the whole symphony, allowing her body to absorb and utilize the healing compounds. One morning, about a year after she started her ritual, she received a text from her daughter. It was a photo of Leo, now 13, holding up a beautifully crafted birdhouse. The text read, "He says he wants to start selling these at the school craft fair. Says he needs his business partner to help him scale up. You up for it?" Eleanor looked at the photo, her heart full. She looked out the window at the old oak tree, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. She looked down at her own hands, resting on the kitchen counter. They were still gnarled, still marked by the passage of time. But they were no longer just a source of pain. They were capable. They were strong. She typed back, "Tell him I'll be there Saturday with my tools. And a thermos." She prepared her morning drink with the same care she always did. But this time, she prepared a second one, pouring it into a small, stainless steel thermos she'd bought for just this purpose. She would bring it with her to Leo's workshop. She would sip it while she taught him how to measure twice and cut once. It would be her fuel, her shield, her quiet companion. As she stirred the golden liquid, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a place of pain, frustration, and resignation to a place of agency, vitality, and connection. It hadn't been a magic bullet. It had been a choice. A simple, daily choice to nourish herself rather than just medicate herself. The drink in her mug was a symbol. It was more than turmeric and pepper and oil. It was the embodiment of a new philosophy, that the body, when given the right tools, has a remarkable capacity to heal. That chronic inflammation, that silent fire, could be quenched not with a chemical extinguisher, but with the ancient, intelligent gifts of the natural world. For anyone navigating the complexities of life after 70, the message Eleanor had for them was not a complex medical treatise. It was simple, born of her own hard-won experience. It started in her kitchen, with a mug and a spoon, and it rippled out to change the very fabric of her days. This is her story, told without a direct script, but as a natural unfolding of one woman's journey back to herself. And if you, like Eleanor, are tired of the rust and the fire, you might find that the answer isn't in a new prescription, but in an old, wise ritual. It begins with a handful of simple, whole ingredients. It begins with a commitment to yourself. It begins with a single, golden cup. Eleanor's simple morning anti-inflammatory drink. This is the exact ritual she followed, a template you can adapt to your own taste and needs. Remember, consistency is key. Times 1 cup hot water not boiling, to preserve the delicate compounds in the honey and ginger. Times 1 teaspoon ground turmeric or 1 inch fresh turmeric root, grated. Fresh is potent and wonderful if available. Times 1 inch piece fresh ginger root, grated or 1/2 teaspoon dried ginger. Times a generous pinch of freshly ground black pepper essential for absorption. Times 1 tablespoon extra virgin olive oil cold-pressed, high quality. Avocado oil or coconut oil can be used as well. Times juice of 1/2 a lemon or 1 tablespoon raw apple cider vinegar. Times 1 teaspoon raw honey or to taste. Manuka honey is excellent for its additional antibacterial properties. Times pinch of cayenne pepper for circulation and a metabolism boost. Times pinch of cinnamon for blood sugar regulation and its own anti-inflammatory benefits. Times a few cardamom pods, crushed for digestive support. 1. Place the turmeric, grated ginger, black pepper, and olive oil into your favorite mug. 2. Pour the hot water over the ingredients and stir well to combine. 3. Stir in the lemon juice or apple cider vinegar and honey until the honey is dissolved. 4. If using any optional spices, add them now. 5. Sip slowly, mindfully, ideally first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, waiting at least 20 to 30 minutes before eating breakfast. Turmeric is a powerful natural substance. It can interact with certain medications, including blood thinners like warfarin, diabetes medications, and drugs that reduce stomach acid. Always consult with your healthcare provider before making significant changes to your diet or supplement routine, especially if you have underlying health conditions or are taking prescription medications. This story is a personal journey and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice.